Good afternoon. I'm Mark Simpson, and I'm the host of this wonderful virtual conference. Welcome to World Class Leadership Live, organised by our good friends at the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and Industry. After 3 months working here at home with 3 children under my feet, I can tell you it's wonderful to have some adult company. And looking through the list of people tuning in today, more than 300 of you, it's clear we've got the best of business with us this afternoon. I know how busy you are, but trust me, I'm a journalist. The next 2 hours are going to be an investment as we contemplate the next 2 weeks, the next 2 months, and the next 2 years, and all of the challenges and indeed all of the opportunities ahead. So how on earth are we going to do it virtually? Well, our guest speakers will be joining us from right across the globe. We're going to go into New York, Lebanon, County Leitrim, Dublin, and of course, Belfast, where we're using the new hybrid studio at ICC Belfast. Already there are a couple of people you'll know well, the Northern Ireland Chamber President Ian Henry and Chief Executive Anne McGregor. It's a big studio, so there's plenty of room to social distance. You maybe caught a quick glimpse of them there. They're abiding by the rules. We'll hear from Anne and, of course, Ian shortly. Okay, first of all, a big shout out to our sponsors. Today's headline sponsor is Electric Ireland, and our supporting sponsors are Queen's University Belfast and ICC Belfast. A virtual round of applause to them for making today happen. So let's get started. And during the next 2 hours, feel free to use social media to spread the word that things in the business world, in the commerce world, in the industry world are getting back to normal. We even have our own hashtag for today, hashtag Leadership Live NI. And where do you see these high-tech graphics we've got? Look at that. Hashtag Leadership Live NI. You don't get that on the BBC. And we'll also be having, and this is high-tech, a high-tech question and answer session at the end of today's event. So please submit your questions. You'll see on a side panel there the way to do it. And if you want to, you can say, when you hear some of our speakers, you can say, actually, I want to ask whoever it is that specific question, and I'll ask them directly at the end of today's session. Right, as mentioned earlier, ICC Belfast. Let's get a quick word now from Ian Henry and Anne McGregor. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark. It's really wonderful to be here live in the impressive surroundings of the new hybrid studio at ICC. NI Chamber has been partners with ICC since it opened. We hold our Signatures President's Banquet here every year. But I honestly thought we would not make it here this year due to COVID. So I was really pleased when ICC adapted their service, using their very talented technical team to provide this new, much more sophisticated service. It's much better than Zoom, I believe. I'm delighted to welcome you, our members, and our guests to our first studio event, Leadership Live, which Mark has already said brings together speakers tuning in from Dublin, New York, Lebanon, and Leitrim. My nerves will be shot by the end of this. This year has undoubtedly been one of the most challenging for business leaders. The challenges of COVID are unprecedented, and they're worldwide, and they come on top of existing challenges such as Brexit and skills shortages, and the challenges we have around carbon zero 2050, for example. While there are early signs of a return to normality and plans to turn back the clock to simply restore what went before, that just would not be sufficient. Businesses must adapt. Government must adapt. This is an opportunity for real change, for a transformation in skills, for increased productivity, the need to fast-track a reinvigorated infrastructure strategy, and a swifter movement towards digitization and sustainability. Leadership Live aims to highlight how others are tackling or coping with the situation, the characteristics that they have developed or used, and their hopes for the future. Leadership really is key and is an area that Northern Ireland Chamber has been showcasing and celebrating for some time, along with our partner Electric Ireland. And we're delighted to be working with the team again. And I'm looking forward to hearing how Dermot McArdle, a leader in Electric Ireland, adapted to the new situation. Before we hear from Dermot, I'd now like to hand over to NI Chamber President Ian Henry.
Thank you, Anne. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us today at Leadership Live. As President of Northern Ireland Chamber, I recognise that these are deeply unsettling and challenging times for all businesses, their staff and supply chains. And Northern Ireland Chamber has been adapting our service to support our members as much as possible through this. Now more than ever, businesses need to work together and be supported and represented by a strong business body like Northern Ireland Chamber. I believe that together we can have more impact and hopefully make a faster recovery. As a director of the Henry Group, primarily in the construction and manufacturing sector, I have been experiencing the impact of this directly. As a family firm, we prioritised safeguarding staff. We adapted where we possibly could to working at home, but we had to close building sites and furlough staff. We also had to review our finances like every other business, and it took strong, resilient leadership, and we are now adapting our business in the response of that. I'm therefore glad to be involved in this event, and I'm looking forward to hearing and learning from the great lineup of speakers today. On that note, I will hand back to Mark to get started with today's proceedings. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks. And it's amazing looking at ICC Belfast. And I know many of us were there back at the end of November for that Louis Theroux event and that banquet when we think there were about 1,000 of us packed in there. Those days will be back hopefully soon. Well, as Anne mentioned there, Dermot McArdle is Head of Business Markets at Electric Ireland. Great friends of NI Chamber. We're going to hear from Dermot in a second. As part of the ESB group, Electric Ireland is actually the largest energy company on the island of Ireland. It supplies, of course, electricity, gas and energy services, not just to businesses, but of course, residential markets. Dermot has, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, more than 30 years experience within the Irish energy business. So what does he think about the current situation? Dermot, over to you.
Go back to the studio.
What are we going to do?
I think we've lost Dermot there. He's maybe like me, working from home or working from the office, where sometimes the technology can let us down. I hope you've all been on social media, because there have been some great tweets recently about working from home. Perhaps my favourite is that you shouldn't really call it working from home. You should actually call it living at work. Well, the technology seems to be working at my end. Let's see if Dermot can hear me now. We'll give Dermot a quick shout out. Otherwise, yes, Dermot, hello. Dermot, unfortunately, the gremlins have got us. We can't hear your mic. I'm going to put Leith in Lebanon on standby. Leith, we may come to you. We're going to give Dermot one last try. It reminds me a little bit of the Eurovision Song Contest here, when you're trying to get all over the world, and sometimes the audio lets us down. Dermot, this is Hollywood County Down calling. Can you hear me? Dermot, I don't think you are going to hit your slot, but if you can bear with us, I don't know if Leith is about. Leith is in Lebanon. Leith Dejani is the director of the William J. Clinton Leadership Institute at Queen's University. He leads the executive education portfolio of programs at Queen's Management School in Belfast. He's an accomplished leader himself with more than 25 years experience, a little bit younger than Dermot maybe. Prior to joining Queen's Management School, he held several leadership roles in major global organisations. Leith, you're most welcome. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me well?
Perfect.
Excellent. Right. So the pose really is, in terms of what's happening today in today's market and today's environment, is very unsettling for a lot of people. We've seen uncertain times, disruptions coming at us at accelerated rates. So as we've seen most recently, things are just changing and morphing faster than ever before. Stuff happens and we try to survive what happens all the time, but it sometimes takes us from the side. It's a side curved ball. We try hard and we plan, but then we get punched in the face and there go your plans. And I think this is what a lot of people have felt that COVID-19 has actually been like. They haven't been prepared for going digital. Perhaps it came a bit too soon, or they haven't necessarily figured out how to think outside of a linear way of thinking because the change came too fast. And when that happens, typically, what we've noticed is that the voice of doubt starts to set into our leadership minds. And as a leader, then we become the biggest obstacle sometimes to leading really well and leading others really well. So how do we get around this, Mark? How do we actually do something about that? There are no formulas. There are no quick answers for this. As we know from the literature and from the academia and from life's experience as well, there are lots of different models of leadership. There's leadership, resilient leadership, there's servitude leadership, there's backstage leadership, etc. But how do we lead in volatile and disruptive and complex environments and then face the adversity? And to be able to do that, we need to truly have agile leaders, what I call agile leaders who can create agile organizations. So how do we do that? Agile refers to being mentally quick, nimble, fast on your feet. Think about facing something, not having a plan, and then thinking, how do I readjust very quickly? And to do that, leaders, we need to be in connection with our mental state and awareness all the time. It's very much about how we pay attention to ourselves, as well as how we pay attention to the other people around us. We need to self-monitor our emotions while engaging with others constantly and regulating ourselves constantly, because not one glove fits any circumstance per se. In other words, regularly we need to be taking a closer look at ourselves, assessing our own motives, and challenging our strengths. We need to create the space for our people to be able to communicate and regularly communicate, because what we find in situations like the COVID-19, the uncertainty, the unsettling feelings that a lot of us have, is we need to communicate more regularly than you can actually quite imagine that we would have to communicate. And as leaders, I believe we need to constantly earn the trust and respect of the people around us from across the organization. We shouldn't take it for granted that just because we're in the leadership position that we're going to get that trust and respect. And that's very critical, because without us giving the trust and earning that respect, we can't create the type of agility across the organization where others can lead and make decisions when those times come, when you get punched in the face, so to speak. So in my opinion, by practicing agile leadership, we end up distributing leadership across all activities. We end up distributing our leadership across all levels of the organization, across all functions, across geographies and individuals, to wherever the best information and capabilities reside. So that in effect means that the organization can act quickly in its own circumstances at the furthest peripherals from any kind of center of command, if you want. So to be agile means that we have to be free from our hindrances that would prevent positive outcomes in ourselves as well as in others. Because like I said at the very beginning, we can actually be our worst enemies if we're not aware of our strengths and our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities, and of the luggage that we're carrying around when we do actually go into the leadership field. So we need to be willing to adjust on the go and lead teams to become one-minded, one spirit, and moving together as one unit. Over to you, Mark.
Leith, can you take a quick question from me?
Sure.
Just in terms of talking about our emotions as leaders, it's something I've never really heard mentioned before. It's almost having like a game. Are you saying you need to almost have a game face for the office and for business, or are you just saying make sure you're in control of your emotions?
No, I don't. I'm not saying either. I'm not saying you need to be in control of your emotions, because being in control of your emotions in its own right means that you're not being attentive to what's actually happening around you. You're paying too much attention to yourself. You're being too self-absorbed in what's happening about yourself. And at the same time, what I mean by you've got to self-regulate always. You've got to pay attention. It's sort of like mindfulness, but you're actually paying attention to what's happening within yourself, how your agitation or you're stirring up due to some circumstance. You might get the fears that you have, the vulnerabilities that you're bringing in. Are you aware of those? Are you aware of your biases as you go into a role of leadership?
Be time for one more?
Sure.
Okay, there are a number of challenges and maybe opportunities in the coming months and years. As life changes, commercial life changes. Brexit is coming as well. And people do have concerns about the state of the economy. As a leader, do you tackle those concerns? You know that your employees and people that you manage will have fears, they will have anxieties. Do you meet those head on, or is it your job to be positive?
That's a very good question, Mark. I don't think you, as a leader, you are trying to create an illusion around what's actually happening. We're facing tremendous change. As I said, it's accelerating towards us with Brexit, with the economy the way it is, with the changes on the landscape all the time. What we need to be aware of is that we can't, as leaders, control all of that environment around us all the time. So we need to start creating agile organizations where leadership tasks and activities are distributed across the organization. So I talked a little about trust and respect, but trust is a very, very big part of it. If we trust as leaders, we trust the people who are working for us to be able to make the right decisions in split seconds, in moments, without having necessarily to confer back to us all the time. Then we have a situation where the organization is nimble, where it's quick on its feet, and it can act. So we need to train people constantly. We need to select the right people. If we're looking at the kind of disruption that's happening in the markets today, are we choosing the right people for the future, or are we simply choosing the type of people that make us feel better in the moment in time? So it's a lot about, if you're aware of what kind of biases as a leader you're bringing into the equation, and you're aware of your weaknesses and your strengths at the same time, you can create trust around you and not create illusions of everything is fine and everything is joyous.
I promise this is my final question. Have you a favorite leader, either alive or dead, someone that inspired you over the years?
I would say not really, because I've had a lot of leaders inspire me in different ways, depending on the situation, depending on the moments in time. I think if we look at, I'm quite a spiritual person, so if I looked at different prophets, etc., I'd say they've inspired me at different moments in time. The genuineness, the authenticity that they have. That's where I get a lot of inspiration.
Good answer, Leith. Safe journey back to Belfast when that happens, and we wish you well. And if you can hang on for us, yes. If you can hang on for us for the question and answer session at the end, that would be great. It's interesting what Leith was saying there, and I might go back to the studio in Belfast at ICC to see if Ian Henry can still hear me, because Leith was talking about this being a time when you're kind of reaping what you sow. It's a time when how much development, how much training you put in actually could pay dividends. Is that what you're finding in your own business, Ian?
Yes, thanks, Mark. Well, I suppose coming from a family business, we've always been keen to bring people up through the business and train them steady through that, and make sure that the leadership is there to guide them through. Over this last few years, we've actually put in place a management training program where we've taken from the top table right down through, training everybody up in management skills so that they can look after these sorts of decisions themselves and with their teams. So we've, I suppose, had a a bit of a background with a lot of training. We have our own in-house training division as well to make sure everybody is well capable for the role that they hold and the role that they want to achieve within the company.
Thanks, Ian. You stay with us with Anne as well. I have faith, and I'm going to go to Dermot McArdle. Dermot, I'm sure this time the technology will not let us down. Head of Business Markets at Electric Ireland. Dermot, over to you.
Hi, Mark. Thanks very much for the wonderful introduction. Certainly hope you can hear me at this stage. There's nothing like the odd technical snafu to keep you on top of your game. And before I forget, Mark, I have to say I thought those graphics were world class. So fair play, they fitted in perfectly with the theme of today. I suppose the first thing I'd like to say, it's really great to be here today as part of this world class leadership seminar. I know we're delighted again in Electric Ireland to be working with the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce to help support the business community in Northern Ireland. And what I'm hoping to talk to today is just a little bit about what we're starting to call the new normal for businesses in the current climate, and what that means maybe for us as business leaders and for our customers, and maybe a little bit of a reflection on what it meant and is meaning for us in Electric Ireland. And I suppose the first thing to note is that we don't fully know yet what the new normal will turn out to be. We know where we are now, but we don't exactly know where we're going to land. All that we know is that it won't be what we've been used to in the past. And I think Anne made a reference to that. There has been some fundamental changes, but it will certainly kind of change how we interact with our customers, our suppliers, our staff, and all of our other stakeholders. And at COVID-19, it's probably the most significant crisis that or experience that I've been through in my over 30 years of working in the energy sector. I mean, we've had economic upheavals in the past, and we've had to deal with social change issues. And as leaders, we're very used to dealing with uncertainty. We don't like it, but we're certainly used to dealing with it. But right now, we're dealing with all of these, and we're dealing with them at a level of magnitude that I don't think any of us have ever seen before. There's no playbooks that we can reference about how to manage in these circumstances. And the challenges themselves have been changing on a day-to-day basis. And if we just cast our mind back, when we think about how quick this has come up on us, if you went back, just 6 or 7 months ago, some people were probably aware, but I'd say many weren't, of the virus outbreak in China and some of the extreme measures that were being taken by the Chinese government to manage the issue. And by the early part of the year, maybe awareness had grown a little bit, and there was some provisional planning being put in place and being made. But I don't think any of us really were aware or fully prepared for the dramatic ramp up that's taken place since the end of March. And back at the end of February, the lockdown in northern Italy, it seemed like such a drastic measure. There's about 16 million people were asked to stay at home, and we're beginning to get aware of the potential economic impact that COVID was going to deliver for us. And that moved through Spain, it moved through France, and then it eventually hit us. And I suppose as business leaders, this has become a real test of our leadership skills. And as I said before, there's no playbook for dealing with a crisis like this. And to a degree, we've been learning as we went along. However, if you look back, and I'm just thinking back to my own organisation, there's probably a number of truths, I'd call them, which we've looked to adopt, and probably other organisations as well. I mean, clearly, kind of transparency and being honest with your staff in terms of not knowing where this is going to go was very important. Obviously being able to give hope, but I think the key thing was probably kind of confidence. And neither I nor anybody else knew exactly what lay in store for us, but it was certainly important, I think, that we communicated that we had the collective skills, talents and experience to deal with whatever was to come. The first port of call for this, for us in Electric Ireland, was to give staff the confidence that we would live up to our values. And in a sense, there's no better time to do this than in a time of crisis. And the decision was taken very early on in Electric Ireland that we would move all staff to remote working. And for some, this wasn't that unusual. They were used to this. They would be out on the road. They'd be customer relationship managers or CRMs. They would be used to working away from an office environment. But for most, it wasn't something that they were used to. And the decision had kind of a number of effects, but I think most importantly, it demonstrated that our values as a company were real, particularly those related to the safety of our staff and our customers. And these were ones that we would stand behind even in a moment of crisis. And in my own area, in the business markets team, all staff were informed, in very short order. This is probably about mid-March, we would all be moving to a default position of working from home, and it would only be the exception. the very exceptional case where they'd be working from the office, which was something that obviously people were used to. We'd never done anything like this before on the scale that was required. And, it posed a lot of questions for us. And I remember setting up a small subgroup of managers at that time with the specific responsibility of coordinating amongst the staff to meet their needs in terms of being able to work from home. At the outset, this kind of coordinating meant, the simple technical steps such as getting IT equipment out to people's houses, finding out which staff had access to their own equipment, and then providing solutions for staff members who didn't have this kind of access. But it also meant keeping the staff, I think, fully informed of the general direction of travel. We may not have known every single point on the road, but we knew generally where this was going to go, and to keep staff informed and be open and honest with them. And I'd say, thinking back, it was about maybe over the course of a week, we had all of our staff set up to work remotely. And that, included diversion of phones, training on video conferences tools for those who hadn't used them before. And by the end of that first week, by late March, I'd say we were nearly fully working from home. And for Electric Ireland, that was, several hundred people who had been working in an office environment across several offices, the week before, all working remotely and keeping the business going. And I think the other lesson that came out of that for us was that, not everything can be centrally planned, and that kind of leadership also involves empowering, and staff members needed to be empowered to solve problems as they arose. On occasion, this would mean kind of areas which just need to agree and work to new process changes where it was appropriate, and just to action it and not to wait for approval. But we also needed to give confidence to our customers that we would be there to support them through this. We're in our 21st year in Northern Ireland, and it was a big year for us to get that. And it's a little bit disappointing that COVID has arrived on that very significant anniversary for us. But I think that longevity itself gave customers the confidence that we are a good partner for them. And we actively reached out through our customer relationship managers and our service teams to work with our customers, particularly those who might have been encountering some level of difficulty, to help them through this crisis. And looking back kind of with time, has moved on a bit, and the business has settled down into this new pattern, which I think will be a temporary pattern until we find, the full enduring norm. And as I mentioned earlier, we entered this new normal, and we learned probably, I'd say, some new strengths that we have as an organisation that will probably persist in the longer term. The energy of the first few days, the weeks, it always dissipates, and other issues come to the fore. And for our staff, it was very important that we maintained a connection for them to the business while they were working away from the office and away from their teams physically. This was largely achieved through kind of, regular communications, just communicate. It's not the same as doing it in person, but, technology is very good substitutes. And at the start, I'd say probably a lesson that we take away, we probably suffered maybe from information overload at the start. But it's gradually settled down into a pattern, but it's not just a formal calls, but I think also the virtual coffee breaks and the get-togethers, they've been equally important in supporting the information flows and maintaining a team spirit. And I'd have to say, despite our earlier snafu, I think technology has helped enormously. And while there's still aspects of it that are difficult to do remotely, by and large, it's helped keep our team dynamics working well. And I do contemplate at times, if this crisis had hit us 20 years earlier, or the much vaunted Y2K bug, if that ever happened, would we have been able to react and respond as well as we have in this current crisis? Now, just to come back to customers again and the energy sector, the energy sector was deemed an essential services, so business didn't stop, but it did change. And in terms of leadership, a lot of the same issues, values and actions, they applied here as well when dealing with our customers. And the first question we asked ourselves was, what can we do to support our customers? And information was clearly key. So one action we did was utilise our website, and we built a COVID-19 section for both our residential and our business customers. We also provided online capability for our business customers, in particular to self-serve through our business online portal, as well as ensuring kind of that we had the ongoing and continued normal operation of our service teams and our service centres. But another key aspect, I think, of business is the business of selling. We're all in that game, whether it's services or products. And one of our earliest calls was to stop our physical sales visits to customer premises. Now, that meant for us that we had to divert our resources into other channels, other sales channels, other communications channels, either through our web platform, through our service desk, or, for the larger customers, again, through our CRMs. And I'd say video conferencing has worked well in that regard as well, keeping us engaged with our customers. It's not everybody's cup of tea, and we probably saw some early reasons for that, and particularly maybe not for larger groups. But I think similar to how we all became experts in contracts for differences during the financial crisis, we're all becoming experts in video call platforms like Skype and like Microsoft Teams. And on a personal level as well, I suppose the last few months have meant some changes for me and how I approach things in terms of leadership style. But if I, many ways, but if I was to pick out one of them, I really think it's just to keep a sense of perspective. Technology will fail, as we've seen, difficulties will arise. And as a leader, I think if you can't keep a sense of context, it's unlikely that others will either. It's really important not to sweat, the small things, because that's what they are, they're small things, and, we will come out of this on the other side. We have faced a lot of challenges and crises in the past, and, without looking to create a hostage to fortune, with the economy slowly starting to open up, it may well be, and you would certainly hope that some of the worst fears that were imagined when COVID-19 was hitting us, hopefully won't come to pass. So in summary, I don't think anybody could have predicted the level of change that COVID-19 has caused, and we'll likely have some way to go before the impact of it fully dissipates, particularly in some really hard hit sectors like hospitality and aviation. But as a business community, I think we have demonstrated real leadership together with the government and, with society as a whole. We're absolutely not out of this yet. But I do think, Anna, we do have some grounds to believe, we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. So over to you, Mark.
Worth waiting for, Dermot, and happy 21st birthday to Electric Ireland, Northern Ireland. And
a big year for us. We're really, really happy.
Here you are.
Very
no
impressive.
Expense spared.
Very impressive.
Dermot,
Super.
If you can stay with us for our question and answer session,
I will, of course.
We'd really appreciate it. We've got a real treat now coming up, because in our next session, we're going to hear from Margot Slattery. Many of you know Margot. She is the Global Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at the Sodexo Group. She's Limerick born. She joined Sodexo in the early 1990s as a junior manager, and then went on to become country president for Ireland and Northern Ireland. She was this cross-border body. She's now a global businesswoman. I spoke to her before today's event about a range of issues, and we can hear now what she had to say. Margot Slattery, good day to you.
Good day, Mark. How's it going? How are you keeping?
Where are you broadcasting from today?
I'm broadcasting from lovely County Leitrim. I'm in lockdown in County Leitrim, and I have been for the last 3 months. But listen, appreciative to be in Ireland and make the best of the situation.
And as lockdown is easing across these islands, what's your business head tell?
Well, I think the challenge ahead for leaders is just enormous. I mean, leaders have, I think, two big areas. If we're talking about two buckets of leadership, they've got the economic challenge, which is just, really, really big. And then the whole part of coping with post-COVID, what people are feeling, the emotional impact of that, and I suppose making people feel comfortable to be back in the physical workplace, to deal with people who've been working from home, and to be adaptable in a world that's full of ambiguity and change. So I think for leaders is a really difficult time. They're going to have, so many balls in the air and so much happening, and a real challenge to know how to concentrate. The road and the path is not certain, most definitely.
You yourself grew up on a family farm in Limerick, unpaid work, and now you're a global leader within your own organisation. What is it about you, do you think, has made you a leader?
And it's interesting. I think a lot has to do with my background and where I grew up.
Margot Slattery, good day to you.
Good day, Mark. How's it going? How are you keeping?
Where are you broadcasting from today?
I'm broadcasting from lovely County Leitrim. I'm in lockdown in County Leitrim, and I have been for the last 3 months. But listen, appreciative to be in Ireland and make the best of the situation.
And as lockdown is easing across these islands, what's your business head telling you about the challenge ahead for leaders?
Well, I think the challenge ahead for leaders is just enormous. I mean, leaders have, I think, two big areas. If we're talking about two buckets of leadership, they've got the economic challenge, which is just, really, really big. And then the whole part of coping with post-COVID, what people are feeling, the emotional impact of that, and I suppose making people feel comfortable to be back in the physical workplace, to deal with people who've been working from home, and to be adaptable in a world that's full of ambiguity and change. So I think for leaders is a really difficult time. They're going to have, so many balls in the air and so much happening, and a real challenge to know how to concentrate. The road and the path is not certain, most definitely.
You yourself grew up on a family farm in Limerick, unpaid work, and now you're a global leader within your own organisation. What is it about you, do you think, has made you a leader?
And it's interesting. I think a lot has to do with my background and where I grew up. I think rural Ireland, Northern Ireland, it's a great sort of planner or preparer for the kind of challenges we have in life, because you grow up in a community. There's a vast diversity of people. There's a lot of things you need to take into account, and you've got to always try and get on with everybody. So I think that's a great start for leadership. I would say for me personally, coming from a very loving family, parents who, whilst not wealthy, were, I think, greatly involved in the community. So about the social inclusion was very important, and it really helped me see that there was a bit beyond my own self and just our own family unit. So that was a big help. And then a sense of doing the right thing, helping other people. And I suppose when I think about leadership, it was about always trying to see that you move forward, and that, no matter what sort of pulls us down. And let's face it, in both Northern Ireland and the Republic, we've had many challenges, but we've also found our way through. And I think that's very important. And those things have always helped me, and particularly the time I was growing up in.
And the issues of diversity and inclusion are very close to your heart, professionally as well as personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think professionally, in the sense of working for a large organization. So we were, before COVID, and we'll see what happens into the future, but we were a little less than 500,000 of employees around the world in 70 odd countries. So professionally, just by the very fact of that, all the different cultures, the countries, the kind of thinking, the challenges we face, that creates challenges for us to be diverse, and it also creates big challenges for us to be inclusive. We would be seen as a leader in this field, but that work never ever stops. And as we go forward, that will continue, and those challenges are there. And personally, from the time I've been really young, this has been something that's been a passion for me. I think, again, taking off a bit of the gilded glasses, growing up in the countryside, you see a lot of things that are wrong, and that people are not included. And I always wanted to make for change, and particularly maybe around social inclusion, because not everybody all gets to sit at the top table. So how, getting and helping and making for that change has been something I've always had a kind of a drive to want to improve.
And in terms of being a leader, in terms of setting an example, it's the old cliche about it's not what you say, it's what you do. Where's the balance between leadership in terms of your actions and your words, do you think?
Well, I think now more than ever, the two are really, really entwined. And we can see it at the moment around what's happening, for instance, around racism. It's fine for leaders to put something out on social media or put something out in the papers and say that they're anti-racist. But people will call them up and say, well, but what are you actually doing? And I think that's what's really important. Your words are one thing, but if you don't follow through, your employees, your followers, whatever names we want to give it, but as a leader, you need to be seen to be authentic and to have followed through. And it can't just be sort of lip service. You've got to be able to deliver tangible things that make for change. And if the protests of the last week have shown anything, you can see that people are saying, I'm not content with the status quo. I'm not happy just to sort of write nice things. I want to see what we're doing. And that's across the world. You can see that in the challenges we get to populism, many, many things. Leaders have been called out to stand up and stand behind their purpose.
And it's much more, I've read you say this in the past, than the type of lanyards that you would wear at certain times of the year in terms of supporting minority groups.
Yeah, I mean, listen, something I said in work recently, and, it constantly rings true for me, is that inclusion, diversity and inclusion. So diversity is having the right mix, and inclusion is making sure that people feel included. It's not a trophy. And if it is a trophy, we're on the wrong track. Because if it's a trophy you take down every so often and you dust off and it looks good, at the right times, or as you say, lanyards, etc., then that's not really making a difference, because it's just a short-term thing. We need systematic change. We need to constantly revisit that change and look to exercise it. So I think of it a little bit like, I suppose I would use the analogy, it's a bit like a muscle. If you don't keep using that muscle, it dies and it wastes away, and you need to constantly do that. So if I take the example of my own organization in Sodexo, we've won lots of awards, done fantastic work, the people who've gone before me, a lot of them. But if I sit in my new role and don't do anything else, then that'll just fade away, and nothing will matter to the people who are asking the questions today. So I've got to exercise that muscle, and the same with our leaders. They can't sit back and wait either.
And I think you've said before, you believe in terms of leadership, it's actual buildings that sometimes may need to change as well as attitudes.
Yeah, I think, we if you think again, and I'm taking very relevant example, but COVID, people coming back into the physical workplace and a lot of us have been working from home, so there's no such thing as coming back to work for a lot of people. We've been working, but, is the building really suitable for everybody? So if you have a disability or various other things that may be happening for you, is the building suitable? Even the very fact that we're being asked to wear masks, and yet, say, for instance, somebody who has a hearing or a speech problem, they may not even be able to lip read or read that. Wearing masks can be a really big issue for people with autism. And I'm just taking that as an example. If you need to use a wheelchair, is the space being thought about? So it's great, this whole sort of rush about the physical and that, but psychological safety is really important for people as well. So we need to make people feel they're safe when they come back into workplace. I would also say, and we see it in our own country, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic, we see that domestic violence is on the rise. People have been through a huge amount of stress. People are feeling very uncertain. So again, when people come back into the building, they need to kind of feel that comfort around that. So it's the psychological safety, but also making sure that the building works for people and that we've thought about that in the process. And that's just a very lively example at the moment.
Margot, we've only been talking for about 8 or 9 minutes, but already look at all of the issues that we've discussed and all the challenges out there. Can it be a lonely place being a leader sometimes, particularly at a time like this?
Oh, I think it absolutely can, Mark. When I did my last role, which was the CEO and country president for Sodexo, you're the top leader in a country. Sometimes, the people who were your friends, who were your colleagues are no longer, things change when you make a difficult decision. And particularly, I think for leaders now in the coming months and years, they're going to have to make lots of difficult decisions. So, when you make those difficult decisions, nobody likes what you have to make. And it can be very, very lonely. And you have to be able to stand behind that. I think that's an attribute of an attribute of leadership. You have to be resilient. So you have to be able to do that with empathy and with care, great communications, be as transparent as you can, but make sure at the end of the day, if you're going to make a decision, make it clear and fast and stand behind what you do, but know that may leave you in a space where you're very much on your own. And I think that's a reality that is, if it hasn't been there for people, it'll be coming, because we can't be popular with making for change. That's the truth.
Good point. A couple of last questions. A difficult question, perhaps. A provocative question, perhaps, as well. You're a champion of diversity and inclusion, but you may have people out there saying, I would love to have the time and the money for that systematic change that Margot was talking about. But actually, my company at the moment is in a battle for survival, for its very existence. And these sorts of issues, they're going to have to wait.
Right. Well, I think that's a great question, because, never more than before are we as consumers. So if you think about anybody who sells anything to the public or a service or anything, never more than before are we as consumers or people who buy services, I think, more attuned into what the purpose and who those companies are. So the reason, and I'll bring this full circle. So if I make a choice to buy a service, to get somebody to do something for me, or I buy a product, I want to know the company who's providing that. You know, depending on my age group and my social class and all of those things, I might make certain choices. But a lot of people are asking, why am I buying this? Where is it coming from? So if you take an example, you know, in Northern Ireland, great producers, people want to buy local, they want to make sure they're doing something in their local environment and they're supporting locally. So people say, oh, well, I can't, but you need to, because your end user is asking you to have thought about that. Also, I think that those who are our customers, our consumers, our employees are looking in a company to make sure that it is inclusive. But, you know, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Good manners have never, ever cost money. Being respectful of people have never cost money. Giving people a chance to be part of the conversation have never cost money. And making sure everybody around the table, and, you know, technology has been great for this in some ways, everybody around the table, and that we've more equality about how people come there. I mean, the great leveler of this time has been that when we're all on a call, you can see everyone's living room, office space, whatever, you know, we're all kind of coming at it from, and whether it's big, small, whatever, we're all in front of one camera, and, you know, we get to have our voice heard a bit more. So I think it's never more important, because the choices people make will be about how companies react to some of the challenges in society. Sorry, it's been a long answer, Mark.
No, but it's interesting because you're saying actually there's an opportunity here.
Absolutely. And, you know, when I make choices to purchase, so, you know, based here, we're near Carrick-on-Shannon, you know, if I bought books during lockdown, I bought it from a local bookshop who sent them in the post. I bought from my local pub, you know, they were doing takeaways. We made choices all the ways along to support local small businesses, you know, the local market, someone locally who was doing flowers, whatever it might be, as much as we can afford to. But we made those choices because we want those businesses to be here at the other end, because it makes for quality of life. And we all want to live in a decent society. I don't believe there's anybody out there who doesn't want the best out of life. And I mean the best being just decency and respect. And we'll all fight for that, and we'll make choices. Now, we obviously have to be able to afford them. But again, we ask those questions of the businesses. And if somebody's exploiting or doing the wrong thing, I think we make very quick decisions to switch away from that organization. So there for me is the business case about why this is important.
Margot Slattery, one final question if you have time.
Sure.
Your favourite leader and why?
Okay. Well, for me, that's really clear. It's always been, and probably always will be, our former president of the Republic of Ireland, Mary Robinson. The why, because from the very beginning, her whole history, right through to when she became president, and now what she's involved in, has been about social justice. For me, she stands up as someone who has an amazing authenticity, sticks by her guns, and you know, never ever sort of let me down, and she never stops fighting, and I think that's fantastic. I admire people like that.
A nice note to end on, Margot Slattery. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mark. Lovely to be with you.
What a wonderful woman. Lovely to chat to Margot Slattery. Before today's event, that last question, who's the leader you most admire? I'm going to put somebody on the spot now. Let me think. Let's go back to ICC Belfast. Anne McGregor, who's your favourite leader?
I told you my nerves would be shot today with technology, but I'm keeping really cool. I'm like Leith. I actually don't have one particular person. But through my life, there's been different people, and it seems a bit soppy, but as a child, my mother, who was really smart, but she was an uneducated person from rural Donegal, she really pushed me on the education front, you know, to go to university. And when I got to university, I was a working class girl from Limavady, but there was people won't believe it, but I wasn't very confident then. I didn't talk much, which is not like me now at all. But there was a professor there who actually took an interest and encouraged me to find my voice and make me realize I was equal to everybody else around the table. And I suppose when I got to work, I had a really hard-nosed boss. My first job was in production management, and really, really hard-nosed a boss who kept, when I thought I'd had the answer to your question, he would always ask why. Apparently it's the 5 ways of production or something, but every way I trained myself to, that I would have the answer next time. So that taught me how to be a reliable, questioning person that helped me get things done throughout my career. And then, so it goes on. I've been fortunate enough to be in the Chamber 10 years. It's the longest I've ever stayed in a job, so it's a fantastic place. But I think part of that is I get the opportunity to work with fantastic presidents who all come from different businesses or leaders in their fields. So the likes of Ian here and also Elvina Graham or John Healy, to name the last few. So I'm constantly learning and being challenged and learning to be a good leader to my team by learning from those leaders.
Thanks, Anne. This is turning into Anne McGregor, This Is Your Life, rather than Leadership Live. But we'll move on. If you've got questions, remember, for Anne or any of our other speakers, for Ian or for Laith or for Dermot or Mark Nevins, who we're going to hear from in a moment from New York, please put them in. I think it's on that side. I'm probably on the other side. I've probably got this wrong. I think it's on that side of your screen, or maybe it's the other side. You will have the opportunity to put down specific questions for any of the speakers or just general questions that you want. As mentioned previously, we're going to New York, only virtually, sadly. Wouldn't it be lovely to go in person? Mark Nevins is there. He's got up early for us. He's an author, an advisor. He's the president of Nevins Consulting. Mark works with CEOs and other senior leaders around the world, not just rapid growth private organizations, but 1,100 companies like American Express. Mark, good morning to you. Let's hear what you have to say.
Good morning.
Over to you.
Well, thank you. I hope you can hear me okay, coming in from New York. And if and when you are able to fly over, please do. Look me up. First round's on me. And it'd be great to see you all. In the meantime, we'll do what we can. I am coming to you from Harlem, where I live, from my home. As you can imagine, it's been a really boring, uninteresting, pretty much run-of-the-mill spring over here. Not really. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about this idea of silver linings. So as a leader, how are you finding the silver lining for yourself and for your business, given this unimaginable turn of events that we're all dealing with right now? And a couple of my friends and colleagues have said, Mark, this silver lining thing sounds a bit touchy-feely. It's a little Pollyanna-ish. This is a pretty serious situation here. Why are you using such a sort of, light and happy metaphor? And I push back and I say, no, I think this is the right metaphor. This is a situation right now. It's a very, very cloudy day. It's been challenging here in New York City in every possible way, and I'm right in the middle of it. My family and I live here, so we did not leave the city. We said, this is where we live. We're not going to go somewhere else, and we've been riding it out, and the sense of community has really been fantastic. But between the economic destruction that I can see walking down the street. I live in a relatively residential neighborhood, so there's a lot of small businesses, and they're mostly boarded up right now. Obviously, all of the anxiety and not just conceptual anxiety, but the real anxiety of seeing hospitals full of people and watching the climbing death rate. I don't know if New York City is still the leader in that. Not something we're obviously very proud of. And all of the incredible racial and social unrest right now. It's just been challenging. So I wanted to talk a bit about leadership, and this idea of the silver lining is to say, as a leader, it's not only an opportunity for you, but it's actually a responsibility for you to say, okay, this is what we've been dealt. This is what it is. What can we do? And that's what I mean by a silver lining. Every cloud has a silver lining. So let's look at the current reality and say, in our span of control, we can do these things. I can either be an actor or I can be a victim. And that is my choice. And taking part in an event like this is amazing and humbling. I mean, it's fantastic to have so many of you dialed in for this. I wish I could see you all and talk with you afterwards over a coffee or a pint. But it's also wonderful to be able to go after a handful of really smart people, because they've covered a lot of what I would have wanted to say. And I'll just touch on a couple of the notes that I've taken here as I'm thinking about what do we really need from leaders right now. And when I think about leadership, I think about leadership as a mode, not as a title. So while most of my work right now is with CEOs and boards, big companies, small companies, I believe that anybody in an organization can be a leader. And I also believe that everybody in an organization should be a leader. And I'll often challenge my clients when we talk about leadership. I'll say, well, look around the organization, and I'd like you to find somebody who you think should not be a leader. You, over there, we want no leading from you, none at all. Everybody needs to lead. Leadership is a mode. It's about generating followership. It's about creating productive and positive communities. It's about finding ways to do things better. It's about taking people from a less good place to a better place. And as I was taking some notes with my fellow speakers who came before me, a couple of things really leapt out at me. And what I think is most needed from leaders right now is this idea of resilience and of leading and managing yourself first. Now, resilience has become a very popular topic of late, and I won't go into it in depth, but if you think about resilience as the ability to spring back, right? Rubber is resilient. Cast iron is not resilient. You can crack cast iron. You can't crack rubber. You can't crack it easily. Way back in the good old days, seems like 100 years ago when we used to get on airplanes, you remember the flight attendant would always say during the pre-flight check, put on your own oxygen mask before attempting to help others. I think, we're all struggling. We're struggling as business people. We're struggling as business leaders. We're struggling as family members. We're seeing our family struggle with this physically and psychologically. You've really got to take care of yourself first, and you've got to lead yourself and manage yourself. Those sound like paradoxes, but I think they're true. We also have to focus on what's most essential right now. There's a lot of noise. I find that the more that I watch television, the more exasperated I get. Social media is just a constant buzz. We have to really pull back and focus on what's most essential. We also have to recognize that no one's going to get through this alone. And we have to all be willing to collaborate, to work together, and to empower each other. A couple of my fellow speakers earlier have touched on this idea of emotional intelligence. We could spend an hour talking about this. I'm sure you've all at least heard about it. If you haven't, you should look up what is emotional intelligence. And it's being able to manage your own emotions appropriately and then understand the emotions of others so you can engage them, help them, lead them effectively, pull them along. And then the final bit of all this that I picked up, particularly listening to some of the business leaders on this call and talking with my clients, is this is an opportunity for us to identify business opportunities, organizational opportunities, innovation opportunities that other people might miss. And then to have the courage to challenge assumptions, to recognize that while we might call this the new normal, nothing about this world is going to be normal. It's going to be a completely different world than the one that we left behind. So in the spirit of that, I thought I would offer very quickly 7 particular areas where business leaders can identify silver linings. Now, I can't give you a specific example because all of you are in different kinds of businesses. If you want to connect with me afterwards, please feel free to link with me on LinkedIn. I love talking with people because that's how I learn. While I can't give you specific things you can do, I can suggest that there are areas you should be looking at. And I think there are 7 areas, and the 7 areas will not be surprising to you because of the 7 areas we always have to think about as business leaders. And the 7 areas are strategy, customers, products and services, process improvement, cost management, your people, and your community. So that's 7. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to touch on each of these for about a minute and just give you some thoughts, principally by asking you to think about these 7 areas in a slightly different way. Okay? So We talk about strategy first of all. This is the backbone of any business, any organization. Not only what are we trying to do, but how are we trying to do it? I think it was Leith who quoted the eminent philosopher Michael Tyson, who is famous for saying, "Everyone has a plan until I punch them in the face." And that's kind of what 2020 feels like so far. I think we all felt when we started out in January, this was going to be a great year. 2019, maybe not the best year. We're going to turn over a new leaf. It's going to be great. And then, boom, by the end of February, the changes are unimaginable. And I think for business leaders, it's really important that you fundamentally rethink your strategy. Use this time to do that. There are things that you planned to do this year that you are no longer going to do. And you just have to accept that. This no longer makes sense. We can't afford to do this. The market doesn't want this. There, however, are some things that you will still do. And I think doubling down on those, really being very, very pointed and very essentialist and saying, we may have to do these things differently, but this is a gut check for us on what's the real purpose of our organization. How do we deliver value? I think there also are, and this is the third dimension of all this, things that you will do that you never imagined you would do. So the businesses that are successful are the ones that are going to find new ways to deliver value to their customers, new ways to think about the value they deliver, the means to deliver that. And you can pick any business. In New York City, it's been fascinating to me in my neighborhood to watch how the different restaurants have approached their strategy, because you have to close down. So what do? Do you just close down and go home? It's a cash flow business, so obviously it's very, very difficult to keep it running if you're not selling a lot of product. And, some have moved to deliveries. Some have moved to delivery of cocktails, for example, which is a high margin product. So that helps. And then some of them have said, we're just going to convert to delivering full meals. So we're not going to ask you to choose from the menu. We're going to say, you've got a family of how many people? Let's bring in dinner. Let's try to turn this into a little mini catering business. And I picked that as an example because it's so easy to see how these small business leaders are thinking in fundamentally different ways about the value they bring. So when it comes to strategy, completely rethink your strategy. Don't throw it out the window, but go back and ask some hard questions. In terms of customers, which is the second one, the biggest problem right now is that for many of us, our customers aren't buying. And that is sort of the fundamental problem. Even if they're not, I think this is an important time to reconnect with your customers and reconnect with them in a meaningful way. Online retail is a big deal in the United States. I won't mention the retailer, but it's one of the obvious ones that about 5 years ago, I bought a pair of socks from this company, and I am getting 3 or 4 emails a day from them with a new sale, a bigger sale. You really need to buy a pair of chinos right now. Wouldn't you need a new sport coat? And I'm like, no, I really don't. Not really going anywhere. Why do you keep trying to just sell me in the same way you always have? I think the businesses that are reconnecting with their customers, that are sharing stories of the challenges, that are asking questions, that are listening, that are finding ways to better understand their markets, which then, of course, can help them rethink their strategy. This is a time to do that. And it's a time to build what I call non-transactional relationships. So think about how you're connecting with your customers. Don't be shy. This is not going away anytime soon. So rather than holding your breath and hoping we'll get back to normal, think about how you're engaging all of your constituencies, including your suppliers, including your business partners, but certainly your customers. If the third topic to think about is products and services, of course, we're always thinking about that. Hand in hand with number one, which is to rethink your strategy, I'm going to have a radical suggestion on this one. And brace yourself, particularly if you're in a product business. I'm going to suggest that you find ways to give things away. Just give stuff away. If you're in a services business, this is very easy to do. I have been doing lots of webinars like this. I'm doing them for current clients, for former clients, maybe for future clients, and I'm not charging for these. It's an hour of my time. I enjoy doing it. I'm not spending a lot of time on airplanes right now, so it's kind of a wash in terms of the pressure on my daily calendar, and I enjoy doing it. And hopefully, my people who are dialing in for this find some value in it. And will that ultimately lead to more business for me? I don't really care. I think it might. I think it makes the world a better place. So, you can see this in in content businesses, newspapers, magazines, streaming video, finding ways to give content away. This again, it's going to be a different decision for everybody. And I can't look at your balance sheet, but if you've got a ton of inventory sitting in some warehouse somewhere, maybe it's now time to think about distributing that to your customers in a way that will appear to be real value given to them at little or no cost. So that's my radical one. In terms of innovating and making improvements, again, this is going to be very different for business to business. I think we all hope we'd be back to normal by, it's been a rolling timetable. Maybe we'll be back to normal by mid-April, maybe it'll be, May 1st, maybe it'll be July 1st. It's going to take a while at this point. So maybe now is the time to recognize we have to wait and see. While we're waiting and seeing, what can we do? How can we improve our business? Can we put together a new suite of offerings? This is a good time to get some intellectual capital out there. Is it a good time to publish something? Is it a good time to put in place that system you've been thinking about, that new CRM? What I've been seeing a lot of my professional services colleagues doing is taking this time to brush up on areas of expertise. I've been doing more of my time recently has been spent on boards, working with boards and sitting on boards. And I thought this is a good time to hone some of my director skills. And I've taken a couple of online classes, and it's been fun and interesting. The fifth area, of course, is cost management. Every business should be thinking about this on a regular basis. And we've got to look at all of our set assumptions around costs. Okay. So clearly in New York City, everyone's thinking about how much office space do we really need? We're thinking a lot about travel costs. I travel a great deal for my business. One thing I've learned from this pandemic is that this method is not ideal. I don't love it for big groups, but actually it's quite good for the one-on-one work that I do. There is a real sense of intimacy. I'm in your home. You're in my home right now. I'm wearing a tie today. I don't normally wear a tie. My clients show up in t-shirts half the time. And I'm leaning in to see you, and we're never this close when we're together. So I think there's ways to think about travel costs, about real estate costs, about all other kinds of fixed costs in your business. And I will also say, I don't want to come across as heartless, but this is a time to take a look at your people costs as well. I think this pandemic has been a great opportunity to see who your top performers are, but it's also been a great opportunity to see who's really committed to your mission, who's leaning in, who's spending time with your customers. And if I were looking at having to take out some headcount, and I've been advising clients on that, I've told them, don't just look at the box on the org chart. Don't just look at, do we think we need this role? Look at the person and say, maybe this person's role is not critical right now, but boy, they are committed. They're giving 110%. They really care. Let's preserve the person, move them over here. And hey, look, our general counsel, they're just kind of cruising right now. Do we need a general counsel? I mean, God forbid, we might think about outsourcing that. And I apologize to all the lawyers in the group. My father was a lawyer, so no offense intended. But I picked that as an example, right? So don't just go with, we can't let this person go because of their title. Look at their commitment. My last two have to do with your people and your local community. And what I want to say about the people, your people, is this is the time to generate and demonstrate your humanity. Right? One of the things we've learned is that your people are looking to you, whatever the crisis, whether it's a crisis in America right now, how does your company think about diversity and inclusion? If it's a question of how are you handling layoffs, how are you dealing with really difficult news, we all have to realize, and I think one of the great values of this epidemic has been to remind us of our vulnerability, all of us. We're all in this together. The virus does not see class. It doesn't see race. We could talk about that last comment because I think it does see race, but by and large, I think that's a statement we could say. And we all have to now recognize that people will follow us not simply for what we know or for our title. They will follow us for who we are and what we stand for. And I've been asking all of my clients to take some time to rethink their sources of authority. Why would anybody want to follow you? And this crisis is a great time to think about that, as well as a great time to think about what's really important to you. What do you want to do in the next year, in the next 5 years of your life? What is your greatest and highest use for the organization and for the world that you live in? And then finally, I think this is a great time to reach out to your local community. So the communities we work in, the communities we live in need to be important. I know this is particularly important for businesses that belong to chambers of commerce because you're local businesses. And as you think about how you're getting through this crisis, don't only focus on how do we survive, think about how do we survive as part of a broader ecosystem? What can we do to make our community stronger? It goes back to a lot of things I said earlier about rethinking your strategy, rethinking about your services, and maybe even giving stuff away. So we're all plugged into an ecosystem. The headline news about a year ago in the States was that this group called the Business Roundtable said, hey, look, we're going to challenge this idea, the Milton Friedman idea that that delivering shareholder value is the only purpose of a company. I am, generally speaking, a relatively free market capitalist, but I've never believed that was the case. I don't think Friedman believed that was the case, frankly, because if all I'm doing is attempting to get short-term profit, I am not creating a sustainable company, and therefore I can't deliver longer-term shareholder value. So I would ask each of us to think at this point as well about what we're doing in our local communities. So I think that's about it for me. I hope that's a couple of ideas that might catalyze some thinking. Those 7 things, take them back to your business and use them as sort of a template or a guide to say, what am I doing? What are we doing? And the common theme here for me is, again, silver lining, focus on what you can control. I can't control if it's going to rain, if the clouds are coming in. I can control what I do about that. And that's what I have to say. So, Mark, back to you.
Wow, fascinating and very practical as well, Mark. I'm going to give you a virtual high five from Belfast here. I'm going to lean in as you suggested. Yeah, that's wonderful. It's a good point, actually. It feels as if we're far away, but actually the technology can bring us closer as well. Hang in there, Mark, as well, if you could, for our question and answer session. We have one last very special guest. He's come all the way from County Tyrone to join Anne McGregor at ICC Belfast. Anne, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm not so keen on the lean in because I notice when I lean into the camera, there's a lot of wrinkles around here. So I sit back as far as I can. Thank you, Mark, from New York as well. I'm delighted now to introduce our final guest this afternoon, joining me live in the studio, and it's Kieran Kennedy, Managing Director of O'Neill's Irish International Sportswear Company. A little bit of a mouthful there. Kieran has over 40 years experience in textile manufacturing and has been Managing Director of O'Neill since 1988. He's also very, very experienced in the growing and important sector of social enterprise. We have many members in that sector, so it's great to see that you actually are the chairman of Strabane Training Service and chairman of Strabane Business Improvement District, both volunteer roles. That's part of that helping the community, which is really, really important. In 2019, Kieran was awarded the Global Ireland's Award for Service to Irish Enterprise by the Consul General in Boston. And in April 2020, he was appointed to the board of Invest NI. Kieran, you're actually really very welcome. And it's nice to have someone in front of me in the studio that we know we can control.
Thank you, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Congratulations on all that you've achieved. We just wondered, would you give me a little bit more about your personal background, your career pathway, and maybe tell us a bit about how you got to O'Neill's, and then we'll elaborate on that later.
Well, I'm from, Sion Mills. I've always been living in Sion Mills, and I left school at 16. School wasn't for me. I had a twin brother, Brendan, and Brendan, he stayed on at school, but it wasn't for me. So I went to O'Neill's. There was 30 people employed in it, and I started work there. I just thought it was like a short-term thing because my father, instilled into me, look, you're going to have to work. You can't lie about it or whatever. So, and after 9 years then, I was appointed as general manager. And I suppose for me, it's all about the values. I've learned throughout my career is about the values, both of the organisation and both your own personal values. And from my point of view, I made myself a promise the first day that I took over as the manager was that I would never refuse an order and I would never let a customer down. Because when I started O'Neill's, there was only 30 people employed there. And when I took over as manager, there was only 30. And the previous manager, didn't want to expand. So very, very soon I moved. I was only there that was in '88, and by 1990 we'd moved into a brand new factory in VSNA or IDB at that time. We had actually grown to 150 at that stage. We just continued to expand, and we have about 750 on our payroll today.
That's fantastic. Actually, I was saying Northern Ireland Chamber are trying to work to grow the private sector, but also to help businesses grow. And, there are many firms that don't have the ambition to grow, so you're a fantastic role model for that, so thank you.
Ambition is very, very important. You have to want it. And if you want it enough, you'll get it.
That's great. O'Neill's has been long established, and you've come through, you were here during the Troubles, you would have been here through at least 2 recessions, if not more. Yeah. But COVID-19 obviously brought serious challenges that were unprecedented and worldwide. I know in March, very sadly, you had to literally close the factory and make all your team, the majority of your team redundant. But within a week, now I thought it was 2 weeks, but it was in a week, you were back out there and producing PPE for the health service. Was that just because of an opportunity, or was it a mixture of your leadership and tenacity as well?
Well, I suppose at the end of the day, it's about drive and, determination. For us, whenever the pandemic started in China, we thought to ourselves, if this ever comes to affect us, it would have had a big effect on our supply chain, because, we're a vertically integrated organisation in terms of, we buy yarn in from China, we knit the yarn into fabric, we dye it in our Dublin factory, and it comes back to Strabane, and we cut it into the garments then. So, very early on, we decided, our main season will be starting round about the start of March, and we wanted to make sure that we would have enough supply chain and inventory of yarn so that we could, keep going if these factories shut down. So we were looking in that respect that we had the raw materials, and that would have stopped a lot of companies from pivoting into, different areas during the pandemic. So, for us, our order book just stopped as soon as the sports stopped, literally. So our orders basically fell off a cliff. And, within a couple of weeks, we just run out of orders. So we had to make a very, very difficult decision to, close the factory and make our 750 staff, lay them off. That's what we did the first day. So that was very, very, very difficult for us. We have never, ever in our history had to lay anybody off. So, we had a very difficult decision. So I sat there that night, and I was in the factory on my own, and I was just pondering, what are we going to do here? We can sit back and do nothing and just wait to see what happens. And even at that stage, the furlough scheme hadn't been announced the next day. So, it was, how are we going to protect the staff? How are we going to, keep the show on the road, basically? So, I had a couple of calls during that week or whatever. There was a few sound bites coming around about shortage of PPE in the local hospitals. So I decided to just do something about it. So the next day, I went down to the Altnagalva Hospital in Derry. I met the acute services director. She gave me a sample. I came back up. I met our production manager in a car park. We looked at the sample. Next day, it was a Saturday morning. We went in. We cut the samples. We cut a pattern out of the sample that we got, and we made our own version. So then I have a very close friend, a doctor in Derry, and went down and met her, and they thought they were brilliant. And by Monday, I had an order for 10,000. By Wednesday, I had an order for another 60,000, and it just kept going and going and going. So, that's,
So it was leadership, it was
the opportunity was there, and the fact that we were able to manufacture our own fabric. So once I got the order on the Saturday and say, right, we're ready to go. Monday morning, I lifted the phone to our dye house in Dublin, who had plenty of raw material in stock, which we had knit, ahead. and they started dyeing it. So they wanted, say, maroon for the GPs that were going into the COVID centres. They wanted their own identity, their own colour. By Tuesday afternoon, I had maroon fabric in Strabane, dyed and all. We cut it that night, and the girls were back in manufacturing scrubs on the Wednesday morning.
There's a lot of, when COVID happened, one of the challenges was that all our product was, in China or wherever. So it was fantastic that you had your vertical supply chain.
Yeah.
And the materials you used, would that material normally be used in shorts and sports gear? Or
that actually would have been the material that would be used for making the majority of our jerseys.
All right.
But we're getting real good feedback from, all the staff that are wearing them in all the hospitals, because they're stretchy, they're comfortable, they're cool. Compared to, the ones that are coming from China, which are made from, polycotton fabric, which is harsh and cheap and cheerful or whatever. So, at the end of the day, but the most important thing about, making stuff like that is whatever, you've got to, you just can't copy people who are doing it, at the moment. You've got to add a unique selling point to it, you know what I mean? So you have to develop a USP. And since we've started to do that, we've done so much different. We have kind of disrupted the market that everybody's looking for this type of product now. We're making them in ladies' sizes, which was never available before for the nurses and whatever, and the lady doctors. We have developed lightweight, scrubs as well. And we're currently developing a process where the actual material will be water repellent. So if anything's spilt on it, it'll just run straight off, but the fabric will still remain soft and, comfortable. So every day we're innovating new products, and that's what you have to do. Try and offer something different that, nobody else is doing or can do.
It sounds to me, though, that you have a lot of good contacts. The fact that you could go to a consultant or you could go to, find a purchase really fast. Is that important? Having good relationships is really important. And respect in the community. How do you,
I'll tell you a funny story about that. So obviously I'd heard the scrubs were looking for them, and then I got a phone call from this lady, and she was the acute services director, Jelly McKay called her. So she rang me up on the phone. She said, "Hello, Kieran, this is Jelly McKay. I'm not sure if you know me or whatever." She says, "But, I believe you're interested in making scrubs. Come down that night." So I went down, and I didn't know her. So I parked the car, and I seen this lady standing across the road, and it was dark. And I went across, and she says, "Hello, Kieran." And I says, "How you doing, Geraldine?" She says, "Do you not know me?" And I says, "Face rings a bell, but I'm not really sure." She says, "Well, whenever you and your twin brother were going to the Christian Brothers Grammar School in Omagh on the bus, I used to get on the bus in Newton Stewart, and you used to pull my hair." So that was the very first introduction I had with her. And then after that, we've been real good friends, and she's been very, very supportive of what we're trying to do. And, all the health service are very supportive of trying to make sure that, companies in Ireland, Northern Ireland, can manufacture PPE for them because, previously they were just left wanting, and they never want to be in that situation again. So, we're working with all the agencies to try and maybe develop this further.
That's great. I always say Northern Ireland is such a small place, and it's a long road that never turns. So always be polite. But so you got away with pulling the hair.
Your past always comes back to haunt you.
It sure does. It sure does. You really have demonstrated really strong leadership and resilience, and in the real truest sense of the word, you've acted fast. You've innovated, and as you say, you pivoted the business operation, and when Leith was on earlier, he was talking about agile leadership. So you're obviously very agile, like the people who wear the sports gear that you provide. But what would be your advice to the audience that's listening, about the role of a leader in innovation? Is it just a leader, or is it a business culture as well? I think Mark touched about some of it.
Well, I think, again, it's back down to the culture. It's back down to the values of the business. It's down to the values of the people, and making sure that the people that you employ exude the values that you're looking for. So, for example, on Neil's, it's flexibility, commitment, passion, and loyalty. So that allows us, to work with our staff, and they'll come in and work whatever has to be done. Like we would sometimes get orders that have to be, maybe very, very short notice, and they'd have to work weekends or whatever. So that's the agility. But then that agility has to be demonstrated right through from the leadership down. Like our company has always been agile. We're always trying to look to see what's the best way of manufacturing products. Whenever I started in the business, like it was these single machines, knitting jerseys one at a time, had to be cut by hand. Where now it's all done automatic. We have the latest technology, single ply Gerber cutters and stuff. So, we have been pivoting all our lives, really.
Yeah.
So for us to move in terms of the manufacturing part was really, really easy. We had the fabric, we had the dye house, we had the machinists, and actually turned from making a set of scrubs, from previously manufacturing jerseys. It wasn't any big transition at all. But what I would be saying is, P.V. O'Neill, who his father founded O'Neill's in 1918, he took over in 1955 or so. He would have been my boss, whenever I joined O'Neill's. He operated from Dublin. But he always said to me, Kieran, you can't go nowhere without a plan. So what I was saying is, you always have to have a plan B. Always have a plan B. And you can call it, whatever you want, strategy in France and in Australia also. So, it's all about, not having all your eggs in one basket. And that's both in terms of your products, not just manufacturing one product, or in terms of your customers, not just have one customer.
That's fantastic. And so none of the consultants were looking for their outfits in, Tyrone colours or Derry colours or whatever.
I was trying to sell them that, but they wouldn't do it.
So you got to use the existing material. As we are now trying to get back to work and we're focusing on the future of the economy, what advice would you give to businesses? Is it the plan B, or what other advice would you give?
It's about time to sit and reflect. I didn't have very much time to sit and reflect. I did it that night, But while businesses have been sort of obviously in lockdown or whatever, it's just time to rethink the strategy. We're going to do a different world altogether. And, we've come up with a new strategy as well. I have worked with my team over this last couple of months as well, and we're looking at basically a digital first strategy. I would encourage people to, go more digital, do more online selling. Our online sales have increased by about 50% since the lockdown. And that has basically kept us going as well. So if we hadn't done that, it would have been a lot more difficult for us. So, if this ever happens again, people need to be looking now at, selling digitally, from small shops or whatever. And, there's no reason why most businesses can't sell their product online, and that's whether it's services or whether it's, manufacturing garments or whatever.
I know it's like, even when Mark was talking earlier about our restaurants have now selling meals at home and are doing quite well. Mm-hmm. As a Chamber of Commerce, we live and breathe networking and promotion, so it was a little bit of a challenge to pivot, but we are getting used to Zoom. We are very digitally orientated through our Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. So our team do a great job promoting companies who are trying to sell. So we complement that. As we go forward, you're obviously talking about exporting and your relationship with the rest of the world. COVID has sort of put Brexit into the shade, but as that comes towards us now, do you think that'll impact on your recovery?
Well, Brexit will be a challenge, there's no doubt, and it's still kind of up in the air. But I believe from any crisis, and the crisis before was always Brexit, and the fact that Northern Ireland would remain within the customs union, I see that as a great opportunity for Northern Ireland. As I see that there's plenty of opportunities to be had on the recovery from the COVID-19. So I think that businesses in Northern Ireland should seize on the opportunity, because at the end of the day, Northern Ireland is going to be the only country in the world that can have free access to Europe, both north, south, and west, east. And I do think that there's huge opportunities there, and that companies should be thinking about that, how we maximise them opportunities. So out of every crisis, I believe there's opportunities, and it's about actually grasping them and and wanting it as well, I suppose, and reacting.
we're in the fortunate position in Northern Ireland to have good digital infrastructure, and obviously we're out shortly for the new project, which will enhance that more, so it will help us. I agree with you. I'm sort of a cup half full type of person. If something goes wrong, you just look at a way around it. I think that's what I learned from production management. I said earlier about my production manager who, you know, when you're young and green and you're getting in and you say, I can't make that because, and I would have stopped at the first barrier because the buffer stock isn't there or something. And then he'd say, why? And then it was because you couldn't get a lorry there. Why? Because you could. And then you realised, and that's how I approach life, you know, find a way around everything.
There's no such thing as can't.
I know.
Absolutely, you know what I mean?
I know.
There's always a way around something.
I think it is something you learn in manufacturing, actually, more than anything in life, and the importance of relationships is really key. Last question: I'm really thrilled for you that you've joined the board of Invest NI, and it's great to see someone who actually is in business on the board. I know they have quite a few people there, but your profile recently, your pivoting and innovation can only be good, but also your whole piece on the social economy. What do you think they should be doing, or how would you love them to help businesses out of this crisis?
Well, I suppose from the start, you know, what drives me is creating jobs. I've been involved with Strabane Training Services for over 30 years as well, and you know, we have about 150 young people in apprenticeship schemes, 25 staff, and about another 100 doing a training for success program. So, as I say, I've been involved with that for 5 years, and it's, you know, it's great, and great people to work with as well. So it gives me some sort of idea of, you know, the public sector. From Invest NI point of view, I've been working with Invest NI since obviously we bought the factory way back in 1990, and you know, we've always had a great relationship with them. So when the opportunity came, you know, I thought I could make a difference. And especially, you know, there was a lot of things about the Northwest not getting their fair share as well. And I said, look, here's an opportunity to try and change that. You know, you can sit back and, you know, on your hands and don't do anything. But I said, look, there's an opportunity here. So, look, I was delighted to be appointed, first of all. But in terms of what Invest NI are doing, they are doing so much work behind the scenes. In terms of pivoting, they have pivoted so much. Like, they have over 650 staff working from home within a very short space of time. They've helped, you know, deliver for the Department of Economy, the hardship funds, whatever. That's a big pivot for them. But the plans that they're coming up with now, both at, you know, executive level and at board level as well, to try and get the company back started, the country or the economy of, I suppose, the north here, back up and run again is, you know, unbelievable. There's so much going on there behind the scenes, and so much ideas, and real good ideas, and, you know, leadership as well. It's just phenomenal to see the work that they have put in over the last while behind the scenes to try and get the economy moving. And I've no doubt that, for me, the most important thing would be get, you know, the 340,000 people that are currently out of work through furlough or whatever, back to work again. And, you know, there's a lot of plans in place there, which will be announced very soon, to try and get that stimulus going.
It is really important. That's why, as a chamber, we do focus on trade and export development. And whilst I am a leader in our organisation, I'm fortunate enough to have a fantastic team of leaders in the chamber, people who organise things like this, but also who do, you know, meet the buyers, etc. And we've just made it. We're doing it online, and we're doing well. Kieran, it's been really interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us from Strabane today. And the beautiful Sion Mills, you're lucky to live there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Over to you,
Thanks
Mark.
for having me.
Thanks, Anne. I think a whole new career as a chat show host may be beckoning. That could be your silver lining. And great to hear from Kieran as well. Great man. My wife's from Strabane. She speaks very highly of O'Neill's. And Kieran, I tell you what, you probably just never sleep. You're always up to something. Great to hear what you've been doing during lockdown as well. Folks, it's Thursday. That means it's question time. I hope you'll be tuning in on BBC One tonight. We're going to have our own version of question time. You've been submitting your questions. And the first one is on politics, not local politics, New Zealand politics. I'm wondering if either Mark or Leith would handle this one, given they both have a kind of global perspective. The question is, what do you think is the key to the success of the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern? She seemed to have handled the COVID crisis well. Leith, I don't know if you've been following events in New Zealand, but as someone who studies leadership, what do you see there?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Well, it's very clear. I mean, she's very much in touch with the people. She hasn't created any illusions around the situation. She's shown a lot of empathy. I think somebody once described her, or she described her leadership with that it's emotion and kindness that she actually shows. So Jacinda's very clear with her messages. She's communicating a lot around, and she's empathizing a lot with the people, which clearly means that she knows her own limitations. She clearly understands how she feels about things, and she's putting herself in other people's shoes a lot of the times in terms of their insecurities. And she's addressing those issues. She's not hiding behind just her leadership position and saying, well, you know, we've got to marshal on, or we've got to protect, or I've got to protect my constituent, etc., or my votes, and so forth and so on. No, she's actually going out there and being authentic. Her leadership is very authentic, I would say. Over to you, Mark.
Well, the press have been very kind to her here in Europe. Mark Nevins, what about in America? Is she making waves in terms of her reputation there?
Yes, she absolutely is. I've read a number of articles about her. I've got a good friend. I've never been to New Zealand. It's one of the places I've not been yet, but I will go someday. I've got a good friend down there, and I've been talking with him. He's a museum director. And I think, absolutely everything that Leith said is spot on. I would also add that she's really cool. And I think that does play very well right now. She's very photogenic. She seems like she's a really interesting and nice person. And I think that gets you part way, because we do follow you for who you are, not for what you do. But I think to Leith's point, she also has been very human, very vulnerable, I think very empathetic. She is looking at things with a policy lens, but also just a humanity lens. That's a culture that has had its own challenges with race and diversity and business and all kinds of things. And I think the other thing that I would say about her is a good lesson for all of us as leaders, and a number of my new friends and colleagues here have hit on this. She seems to be very good at identifying terse, powerful messages and repeating them over and over again. One of the things I would say as someone who's seen thousands of executive assessments and 360s is I have never, ever seen an executive or a leader faulted for over-communicating. It's never happened. I think most of us fail because we under-communicate. And I've got a mentor who says, you don't say it once, you don't say it 5 times, you say it 100 times. Because by about number 93, your people are starting to figure out what it actually means.
Well, that's interesting, because Dermot earlier on was talking about communication and getting the balance right. I think, Dermot, you were saying there was a danger of bombarding people with too much information at the start, and then you settle down into a better rhythm. Is that right?
Yeah, that's pretty much the way it worked for us. I think kind of at the start of the crisis back in, when it really hit home for us back in March. One of the first things that we were very focused on was making sure that we were informing, our staff and our customers, as much as we have. We didn't want to hide anything. I think transparency and openness, even if the openness is we don't have all of the answers, is very important to do that. But because it was so unprecedented, the speed of how it impacted. We had some warning, as I say, from Western Europe and further afield that this was possibly coming, but just the sheer scale and the speed at which this happened, I think, necessitated some really quick thinking on the ground. And that drove a lot of questions then in our customers' minds and in our staff minds, as to what is happening next. So I would say, and I wouldn't imagine we were alone in this, but in the early stages, we probably did get into an overload of information for people. Possibly a couple of routes were repeating the same information as well. So, but it didn't actually take us long to really say, there's a better way of doing this. We can streamline the communications process. And I think crucially, the thing was to make sure it was a two-way communications process. And I can remember the first couple of weeks, it was almost meeting after meeting after meeting was around the COVID-19 crisis, and as a business and as leaders within the business, how would we react to it? What were the actions we were going to take? And all of those meetings were around information sharing. And that's my memories of that early part of it. But, as I said, the business did settle down, that we were able to separate the chaff from the wheat, and the stuff which didn't need to be communicated to the stuff which did need to be communicated. And I think I mentioned as well, the communications took a two-way process. It was both the informal and the formal. And one more difficult to do when you're working remotely is always the informal, which is surprising because, kind of in this part of the world, we're not short of talking when we're given a chance. And yet when you're dealing with kind of the operational crisis and trying to run a business, sometimes that falls away. And I think it's very important that we didn't let it fall away and that we gave space for those informal interactions to take place as well.
And Dermot, I mentioned earlier, you're 30 years in business, and we know business is all about relationships. How do you develop relationships at a time whenever we're supposed to be distancing from each other?
Well, yeah, you used a word there which was crucial, Mark, time. And I think kind of relationships do take time and they take investment, and there are opportunities to do that. And over 30 years, kind of myself, I don't know how many people in the industry I've met and kind of I would know, and they're in my phone book, or in my LinkedIn profile, etc. But nothing beats kind of relationships that are kind of, if you say, forged in the fire of crisis. And I think there's a real opportunity for us as business leaders, I don't want to say take advantage because it's still a very difficult situation, but there are opportunities now to build relationships that will last and kind of, will see us in good stead for years to come. I think technology is terrific at the moment, and I'm sure kind of it'll only get better over the years. But the use of these video conferencing platforms, there are so many applications out there now that you can use to video conference or to keep in contact with. So it's not a difficult process, but it clearly it takes time. And I think the real challenge is separating out a part of your day to invest in those softer areas.
Thanks, Dermot. I want to go back to ICC Belfast and maybe talk to Kieran and Anne and Ian for a second or two about some of the issues that we've been discussing. Starting with you, Kieran. I mean, you had quite a good lockdown in terms of normal people. That captivating TV series, O'Neill's, was all over it. Good for the brand.
Well, again, it's all about opportunities. Whenever he was pictured and he was in all the papers wearing the O'Neill shorts, obviously, we took advantage of it. So it was in all the Twitter feeds. It went viral as well. And then our sales of shorts actually went through the roof. So, out of everything, there's always opportunities, as I keep saying, and it's about maximizing them.
And I want to throw this one to all three of you there in ICC. Decision making. In recent weeks, in recent months, you've had to make big decisions, all of you involved today. And you probably have big decisions to make in the future. I mean, Mark was recommending some pretty tough decisions as well. Have you a process for decision making? Is it any different at the moment, Kieran? Have you a rule of thumb over the years? And I'll go to Anne and to Ian.
Yeah, well, I suppose again, it's always about having a plan. Don't do nothing rash or do nothing. Have a think about it. Sit down, talk to your team as well. What do you think about this? Would this be right to do it this way, or what's your opinion on this? So it's involving everybody. It's involving the team. Like, it's just not the leader or whatever. And it's just good to ask people for their opinion. So. It's not just making decisions on the spur of the moment. It's about taking time, sitting back, and look at the pros and cons. And, that's the process that I would use.
Ian?
Yeah, it'd be much the same as that, to be honest. And again, being a family business, we've always been, I suppose, feeding off each other, which is helpful in cases like this. And, you just have to learn not to be rash about decisions. Sit back, analyse it, see what's happening out there, and then make the proper informed decisions, and make sure you bring your people along with you and that they are informed as to what you're going to do as well.
I was going to add a couple of things. First of all, Kieran was very lucky that guy had his shorts on, because he didn't have his shorts on much through that programme, normal people. Second thing I was going to say is around communication. I have actually, as a chamber chief executive, found it more direct. We can mobile call the chief executive of a company. They ring you and talk to you, whereas normally you have to go through there's a PA somewhere who tries to be the gatekeeper. Or also, when we're dealing with government now, we just ring the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, anybody we need directly, or text them if we want to, because we have so much more access. And the crisis has allowed us to show our value, and so people are coming to us to help with, for example, to lobby for furlough, or to lobby for rates, or to lobby. So I think it's cut out a lot of the barriers to good communication, and hopefully some of that will stay. In terms of decision making, I'd say you can get faster decisions once you've thought it through and you've consulted and planned. But once you've decided on a direction, you can get direct access to the people who can help you implement that decision.
Thanks, Anne. Well, one of the big decisions being made as we speak at Stormont, unless it's already been made and we've all missed it, is whether or not we in Northern Ireland move from 2 metres social distancing to 1 metre as they're doing in England. Just out of interest, Mark Nevins in New York, where are you at, and what's your experience in terms of distancing in the new environment we find ourselves in?
I think it's really too early to say. We have not moved to so we use feet still here. Thank you for giving us that and then abandoning us. We'll use it ourselves. We haven't moved to meters yet. So we're still 6 feet, which is about 2 meters. And right now, I think the bigger questions in congested areas like Manhattan, where I live and work, is just the impossibility of maintaining that distance. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can't ride the subway and stay 2 meters apart or even 1 meter apart. It's just not possible. It's hard to walk down the street. One of the things that I think is going to complicate back to work, or back to the workplace, I like to say, because I think we've all been working, just not working in the workplace, is this idea of most companies are saying 1 person per time in an elevator, or maybe 2 or 3 in an elevator, but no more than that. And they've put spots on the ground, on the floor of the elevator, 2 or 3 if you're all wearing masks. Now, how long is it going to take to get the entire workforce into an 80-story building 2 at a time in the elevators, right? It's not going to be possible. So I don't think we know enough about really how this disease is transmitted. Is social distancing actually as important as merely wearing a face mask? The face mask thing is having a real hard time getting roots in the United States right now because A, it's seen as some sort of bizarre violation of some, putative right you have to not wear a face mask. And I don't think people have really come to understand that you're wearing a face mask for everybody else, not for yourself. Okay. And that's a classic example of creating change through the mindset. I'm strong. And our president obviously is not particularly good at this as a role model either. I don't need a face mask. I'm impervious to germs. Okay, you may be, but as you're breathing out, everybody else is going to have to deal with that. So I don't know. I don't have a great answer on that. I'm trying to keep my mouth shut and listen. I think leaders need to listen and listen as much as I can to the people who actually know what they're talking about, like doctors and other policymakers.
One last question for you, Mark, before I let you go. Have you got a favorite leader? I know I didn't ask you earlier on. Have you got one?
Well, I'm gonna cop out a little bit here and go with the answer everyone else has given, which is I don't have a particular one. If you asked me, I have to read a lot about leadership given my job. So I read a lot of articles and books and historical leaders and contemporary business leaders. And in many cases, my favorite leader is the last one I read about, because I'm less interested in who the leader is in terms of their position, in terms of their title, in terms of, whether it was Churchill or Gandhi or Martin Luther King, three of my favorite leaders. I'm more interested in saying, what can I do with this? And particularly, how can I take an idea here and make it portable to bring to a client or a client organization? But when it comes to me personally, I will give a shout out. I am the son of a good Boston Irishman. I have 23 first cousins in and around Boston, hence my not being a fan of the New York sports teams in my 26th year of exile here in New York City. And my father was not just a great teacher for me. He died 10 years ago. He was a lawyer. Not just a great teacher for me, but also a great role model. And what was very clear was that he believed that who you were and what your values were would determine how you acted in the world, how you delivered your profession, but also how you were a member of a community. I grew up in a small city called Hartford, halfway between New York and Boston, and it was a very, very tight city, highly diverse and interracial. So I think about him all the time and sort of say, what would my dad do in this situation? That's usually a pretty good rule of thumb.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mark. Leith and Dermot, just to finish up, I want to put, oh my goodness, and Mark's, he just broke up there briefly just in time. Mark's provocative, maybe that's not the right word, but certainly thought-provoking ideas about silver linings and maybe be free to give stuff away and look at the people as well as the positions. What do you think, first of all, you, Leith, and then Dermot, about this whole idea of silver linings?
Well, I think like Mark pointed out, in every crisis you have an opportunity, and it's not the end of the world. We're not looking at the abyss and we're standing on the edge of the cliff, so to speak. So we need to be thinking about where are our next opportunities? How do we need to adapt to the constant environment that we're finding ourselves in, where we don't necessarily know where the next curveball is going to come from? So I think technology is bringing about the kind of changes and opportunities, but our new opportunities that are actually out there, are they scanning the markets? Are they sensing the change fast enough? That's the question. And that's where I was bringing in this notion that are we actually picking the right people for the right jobs? Because if you think about the people who are thinking about the future, are the people who are your disruptors in the company, the people who break the rules, the people who don't necessarily follow policy all the time, the difficult ones to manage. And are we listening to them? So I think the opportunity is there, but we just need to know how to put in our microphone and hear and listen properly.
And Dermot,
over to you.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard, Mark, to talk about silver linings in such a difficult situations. But I think from my perspective, there's always two sides to something here. And one of the things that I would maybe point out is that we've probably through this crisis realized that there are strengths as individuals and organizations that either we weren't aware of or we weren't confident enough to test them. And what COVID has driven us to do is to take actions that in the normal course of business in a normal world we would have thought would have been crazy. Like I referenced the point about actually taking everybody out of the office in a very short notice and working remotely, working from home. The head office just being completely empty. That's not anything we ever would have done except in a small way in terms of business continuity plan test. But COVID drove us to do this, and in having done it and kept the business running and kept the relationships going with the customers, we now realize that's a capability we have as an organization. So, there's certainly silver linings in that kind of, we found those strengths and we found those abilities, and we've really tested them, which hopefully will stand us in good stead. I also think I'd echo, I think it was Kieran's point, the world will change after this. People have found new ways of working, relating to each other, doing their shopping, whatever it might happen to be. We won't be the same. It's just to say the organization has tried out new skills and new abilities. Individuals in society have as well. So I think there will be opportunities for businesses as well after this. When we're through the back end of this, there will be more opportunities that we can grab as business. And so I think, there's always a silver lining to things, although it's very hard to talk about silver linings when, it's such a drastic crisis at the moment.
Thanks to all of the panelists. I'm going to give the final word back in ICC Belfast to Kieran. Here, what would you say to a grumpy, grey-haired, now long-haired old hack like me that looks at all of the obstacles ahead and goes, it's going to be a really, really, really difficult couple of weeks, couple of months, couple of years ahead? What would you say to me?
Well, I would just look at the positive aspects. Look at the opportunities, as I keep saying. Out of every crisis, there's opportunities. So, look at the way you can steer around them obstacles. P.V. O'Neill, always said to me, Kieran, you can't go nowhere without a plan. So if you can plan your way around them obstacles and you know what the plan is, and maybe have a plan B as well, that's the way to go forward.
Listen, Thank you all. I can't believe the technology behaved so well. It played up for you a little bit earlier on, Dermot, but it's been amazing to go to Dublin, to go to Leitrim, to go to New York City, to go to Lebanon, and to go to the ICC in Belfast. Thank you to Anne. Thank you to Ian. Thank you to Anne's team as well, including Louise, for organising today. And thanks most of all to our sponsors who made today possible. Our headline sponsor, Electric Ireland, our supporting sponsors, Queen's University Belfast and ICC Belfast. I don't know about you, but I certainly feel a lot more optimistic about the future. I feel a lot more educated about the future, and I actually feel good, just as I said at the beginning, to have a bit of intellectual adult company for a couple of hours on a sunny Thursday afternoon. It's a beautiful day out there. If you can, get out and enjoy it. In the meantime, as someone once said, we will meet again. Take care and hope to see you all soon. From Mark Simpson and from the rest of the team who've made today possible, a very good afternoon.